Just this morning, I saw an article about George Hotz, who is the founder of comma.ai, calling full self-driving a scam, which is really interesting considering that he's in that space himself. Anyway, it's always good to go back and look at your own assumptions and to think about whether you're actually on the right track or not, whether you're being kind of a Tesla fanboy or not, and whether you're being a full self-driving over-optimist or not. Let's take a look. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So like I said, I want to look at this article. It actually came out 6 days ago, but I hadn't seen it until this morning. So anyway, I guess I'm behind the times, but with AI Day and everything going on, I've been a little bit busy lately. Anyway, this is by Steve Hanley and it's called George Hotz, Self-Driving Cars Are a Scam. Connected Cars May Be the New Thing. And I think the subtitle actually is very telling. As we move through this article, take a look at what the sort of angle of the article is, and especially what George Hotz is saying. And as an important aside before we start to read this article, remember that George Hotz is the founder of comma.ai, which considers itself to be a pretty major competitor to Tesla and to Waymo and to Cruise and Mobileye and other full self-driving or autonomous driving software hardware companies. Comma.ai has focused on aftermarket stuff, so basically you can install things after you purchase your car, so you don't have to have any particular car, although only a few models are actually supported at the time. But anyway, that's their sort of model is to be more like the Android to Tesla's Apple, I guess would be the way to think about it. So, Android is sort of an open source platform that anybody can build their phones on. Comma.ai is sort of built that way. Whereas Tesla obviously is much more like the iPhone, which is proprietary hardware and software. And of course, I'll put a link to this article in the description if you are interested in taking a look. Okay, in a lengthy article with Bloomberg News, republished by Autoblog, George Hotz, the serial entrepreneur who founded self-driving startup comma.ai, has this to say about autonomous cars. It's a scam. These companies have squandered tens of billions of dollars. In 2018, analysts put the market value of Waymo, LLC, then a subsidiary of Alphabet Incorporated, which is basically Google's parent company, at $175 billion. Its most recent funding round gave the company an estimated value of $30 billion. So before we continue on here, it is really valuable to look at what's going on in this first paragraph. So Hotz is basically saying it's a scam that all of this money has been put into these companies that have not produced anything. And generally, I believe he has a point with companies like Waymo and Cruise, but that's not the entirety of the autonomous driving space by any means. And also note that Hotz, who is the founder of the self-driving company comma.ai, is calling the entire landscape a scam. He's not saying individual companies are a scam. He's saying the whole thing is a scam, which is really interesting considering that he started one of those companies. So until we dig further into this article, it really is nonsensical what he's saying here, but I think it becomes clearer why he's saying what he says as we read through the article further. Continuing on, the definitive book on the effort to bring autonomous cars to market is Autonomy, written by Lawrence Burns, and you can see part of the, actually, I'll just go ahead and show the whole thing. There's the cover of the book in case you want to go take a look at it. Anyway, written by Lawrence Burns, who headed the early efforts by Google to develop the technology. It's a fascinating tale filled with multiple twists and turns as the team struggled to find the answer to cars that drive themselves. But despite all the money thrown at the problem by Google, Uber, Tesla, Zoox, Cruise, and countless others, autonomous cars are no closer to reality today than they were 5 years ago, and many of those companies are running for the exits, looking to cut their losses if they can. So in my mind, this is where this article starts to go off the rails, because basically Steve is saying that despite all of this money, there has been no progress in the past 5 years, and that's just patently false. Now, could you argue that not enough progress has been made? Sure, that could be an argument, right? Elon Musk said that by the end of 2019 or 2020 or something like that, several years back, he said that there were going to be robo-taxis on the road by a couple of years ago as I'm recording this video. So clearly there was a lot of optimism in terms of how quickly autonomous driving was going to happen. But stating that there's been no progress for 5 years is ridiculous because there has clearly been progress in the last 5 years. 5 years ago, I did not have a car that could drive me back and forth to Atlanta and do 95% of the driving on its own. Yeah, it's not 100% yet, but that's 95% of driving in very gnarly traffic through really weird things, navigating, handling multiple lane changes, taking unprotected lefts and rights, etc., etc. That's stuff that simply did not exist 5 years ago. So anyway, it's on its face just not true. So I don't know quite why the author was so bald-faced in just saying that this is not true when it actually is true, that there has been significant progress, and not just by Tesla. I mean, Cruise and Waymo and other companies have actually begun to do autonomous taxi rides in cities. So there has been progress. Yeah, it's not perfect. It's been bumpy and it's cost a lot of money, and they haven't made as much progress as everyone predicted, but there's definitely been progress. And then the author goes on what I believe is pretty much of an unimportant tangent to the main point here. Anyway, Anthony Lewandowski was part of the team at Google, headed by Lawrence Burns, who wrote the book. For a decade, he was one of the brightest stars in the field of autonomous driving before he disgraced himself by suddenly quitting his job at Waymo and jumping to Uber. What followed was a giant lawsuit between Waymo and Uber and several convictions for stealing trade secrets for Lewandowski. So while this is interesting from a personal and dramatic point of view, it's really not interesting in terms of full self-driving and autonomous driving and where we are today. And it continues on. It says now he's running a startup that's developing autonomous trucks for industrial sites, which basically is just little tiny areas where they can drive around on, a little sandbox that they can drive around in. And the article continues by saying that Lewandowski says for the foreseeable future, that's about as much complexity as any driverless vehicle will be able to handle. Quote, you'd be hard pressed to find another industry that's invested so many dollars in R&D and that has delivered so little. Forget about profits. What's the combined revenue of all the robo-taxi, robo-truck, robo-whatever companies? Is it $1 million? Maybe. I think it's more like zero. So certainly Lewandowski has a point. There's been a lot of money, billions of dollars spent on this technology with very, very little to show for it, except for Tesla, which has been able to sell full self-driving to people like me. So they have actually made some money at this. But generally speaking, the monetary aspect, like what you have actually made for autonomous driving rides and things, is basically nothing at this point, or very, very little. But what Lewandowski is really missing here is the rate of change of things, the pace of change in artificial intelligence. To say that it's impossible for the foreseeable future to have vehicles drive in any kind of autonomous fashion over long distances and not in little tiny sandboxes of industrial sites and things is very, very close-minded on his part. It doesn't seem like that's a reasonable outlook given how rapidly AI is progressing on not just full self-driving, but all kinds of fronts right now. And then about 4 paragraphs into this article, we finally get to Tesla, which seems a little bit odd since they seem like they should be the leader of the forefront of this entire article. But anyway, it doesn't really play into what the article's point is that we're going to get to later. But we finally get to Tesla. Okay, Tesla, of course, has played a big role in the self-driving world, first with its autopilot technology and later with something it bills as full self-driving. But again, remember there's a beta attached to this. So it's full self-driving beta. It's not full self-driving yet. So that's an important point. That's now a $15,000 add-on that our own Fritz Hassler says is not worth the money, even in its latest iteration that was just released by Tesla. The company has done a number of zigs and zags of its own over the years, publicly breaking with Mobileye and its camera-based system to embrace radar. Now it has transitioned away from radar and gone back to emphasizing cameras again. The only thing it won't do is use LiDAR because CEO Elon Musk sees it as unnecessary and costly. He probably also doesn't want his car crapped up with ugly bumps and bubbles, and who can blame him? Teslas are blessed with timeless designs thanks to Franz von Holzhausen. Adding LiDAR would ruin their appearance. Oh man, there's a lot going on in this paragraph. Okay, so I'm going to start at the end. Franz would be okay with putting bumps on the car and he would figure out how to make it look all right if LiDAR was necessary for the cars. So that's the least of their concerns. It's not about aesthetics. Form follows function very, very strongly at Tesla. So they would figure out how to put LiDAR in. In fact, they'd probably put it like inside the car or have it, the glass roof or something. They would have a way that they would manage to do this without making it super, super ugly like most of these other cars. And they've gotten much, much smaller. Also, it's a very big misnomer to say that Tesla completely gave up camera-based systems when they moved away from Mobileye. Yes, they installed radar, but they have always had 8 cameras around the car since full self-driving hardware 2.5 and much less 3.0, which has been around since 2018, mid 2018, early 2019. I don't remember the exact date they transitioned, but it's been multiple years that they've been using cameras with radar. So they never gave up on cameras and said, we're only going to use radar. So it's a bit of a misnomer to talk about how they've zigged and zagged a lot. They've basically been working the same direction always. They've been trying to pare down the amount of sensors that they need, and they've put in the ones that they think are required and not put in the ones that they don't think are required. So again, it's irking to say that these things were only done for aesthetic reasons, or they've zigged and zagged and gone very, very far off. Now, yes, they are searching through the forest, right? Everybody is trying to find a way out of the forest. And of course, in that forest, it's foggy and it's nighttime and everything. So it's very difficult to see. So everybody, obviously, we're not going in a perfectly straight line. After this is all done and full self-driving is basically solved, then in retrospect, it will be obvious what the right solution was. But right now, and certainly for the past 5 or 10 years, people have just been casting about trying to find the best way to do this. And actually for the past 20 something years, because certainly there have been autonomous driving attempts that have been made over decades. So there's been a lot of work that's gone into this, and there've been a lot of dead ends and everything like that. So indeed, you're not going to take a perfectly linear path to get from the beginning to the end. But Tesla has been making good progress, and they've been, essentially stripping away sensors as opposed to adding them in a pretty consistent move. And of course, the ultrasonic sensors that they've gotten rid of the most recently is yet another move, so that they're really only using cameras now, which is very, very cool and a really, really bullish signal. And if you haven't caught that episode, you can check it out right up here if you're interested. Then continuing on, a favorite industry myth is that humans are terrible drivers, but it's not even close to true, says Bloomberg. Throw a top-of-the-line robot at any difficult driving task, and you'll be lucky if the robot lasts a few seconds before crapping out. Humans are really good drivers, absurdly good, George Hotz said. So this is starting to sound a little bit like sour grapes from George Hotz's, standpoint. It's like, wait a second, I drive my car and I drive it at least minutes, if not potentially hours, without intervening on the vehicle at this point. And remember, we're talking about a very, very fast exponential ramp here. So, saying that it can only last seconds is pretty much BS, because we have a definite real world counterexample to that. Now, as far as how good human drivers are as good as human drivers are. That's kind of a weird way to say that. But basically what I mean is we only have one data point. We have human beings driving cars. We don't really have, I guess at some point in the past, there were monkeys and stuff that they taught to drive cars. But basically we have the data point of human beings doing this. So we don't know how good we are. Who's to say that a robot in 5 years won't be able to drive a car 200 plus miles an hour for hours at a time without any danger of getting in an accident, any realistic danger of getting in an accident? Then it'll make human beings look like pathetic little beasties trying to do this, right? So we don't really, saying we're absurdly good, yeah, I mean, we don't crash, that's awesome, but we also have limitations on how fast we can go in any given circumstance, and we have limitations on how dark it is. We have to turn headlights on at night, so we're not that good. Anyway, I do take the point that humans are very good. I mean, the fact that we can walk around and robots have a very, very difficult time walking around is just another point. Humans are good at some things, but we're not absurdly good at it. I don't think that really makes sense to say that. Continuing on, fatal accidents are largely caused by reckless behavior, speeding, drunks, texters, and people who fall asleep at the wheel. Granted, pretty reasonable points here. Although most of the accidents reported by self-driving cars have been minor, the data suggests that autonomous cars have been involved in accidents more frequently than cars driven by humans, with rear-end collisions being especially common. The problem is that there isn't any test to know if a driverless car is safe to operate, says Ramsey, an analyst at Gartner, a market research firm. It's mostly just anecdotal. So in this one paragraph, we have the data suggests and it's anecdotal. So how do we basically square those two things? I would say that I don't have data that shows that autonomous cars have been involved in accidents. I would love to have a source here that shows something like that. And certainly the anecdotal aspect is not really true, because Tesla has published data that shows that Tesla's driving full self-driving beta and full self-driving the regular version, the enhanced navigate on autopilot, are far less likely to get in accidents. Now, yes, you can say it's not apples to apples because they have a tendency to be on highways more than on cities, and people will take over if things get too dangerous. So it's not a perfect comparison, but given those caveats, there's a lot of data to suggest that full self-driving and with human beings in the loop is much safer than driving without it. And here finally is where we get to what I believe is the point of the article, the kind of subterranean point of this, and probably George Hotz also. I think this is what they're going for. Connected cars may be the answer. Much of the hype and hoopla about autonomous cars is focused on how they will make driving safer. Yep. There's no question that people kill themselves and others at an alarming rate while driving. The WHO says about 1.3 million people die from traffic-related injuries each year. And yet, if you study that last paragraph, I assume the one from the linked article here, the primary causes of road deaths are factors that impair the ability of drivers to do what they usually do quite well: excessive speed, intoxication, texting, or falling asleep at the wheel. Well, I've got a news alert. People do this kind of stuff, right? People get up and after a very few hours of sleep and have to drive to work. People do pick up their phones while they're driving. People do things like this. They also drive too fast, all of the above. That's human nature. So, excuse me, that's where robots might come in and actually be very, very beneficial because they don't have those foibles. According to the New York Times, there is a new technology coming available that could address many of those human failings. It's called CV2X, which stands for Cellular Vehicle to Everything Technology. It allows vehicles to communicate with each other and with the surrounding environment, which could reduce collisions considerably. With V2X technology, a car whose sensors or cameras detect a pothole in the roadway will be able to notify their drivers, giving them time to take evasive maneuvers. Highway workers will be alerted to an oncoming vehicle that's traveling too close to them. School bus drivers will be warned against letting children off if a vehicle fails to stop behind them and goes around them, in other words. Bicyclists and drivers will be made aware of each other before possible collisions. Now, all of this is fantastic news. I fully agree that this is going to be fantastic to implement this as much as possible. I just got done biking. You can probably see the little red mark from my helmet on my head. But you know, it's terrifying to be out there and to not know where cars are and what's going on and everything. I would love it if I had some way, not necessarily for me to know, but for everybody, like all the cars around me, to know that they were coming up on a cyclist a good solid mile ahead of time so that they knew in plenty of time. So yeah, all of this would be great. It would be fantastic if cars could communicate with each other and talk about potholes. Hint, hint, Teslas already do this. So in other words, it would be wonderful to have all of this connected technology, but that does not get rid of the fact that it would also be good to have fully autonomous driving. Just imagine fully connected cars and fully autonomous driving. Then we have sort of an ant system where all of the cars can cooperate with each other and they can move traffic through much, much more quickly and safely and speedily. All of that kind of stuff can happen simultaneously if we have this kind of communication. So this is not an either or type of situation, and that's the problem. This is sort of cast as an either or. It's either autonomous driving or connected driving. The real solution is obviously both of these things together. Continuing on, quote, while passive safety such as seatbelts and active safety from such things as lane departure warnings has improved occupant safety, fatalities outside the vehicle are growing. I don't have data, but I also don't have data against this, said Anupam Malhotra, and I hope I got that close to correct, Senior Director of Connected Services for Audi in America. Quote, we're now working to provide cooperative safety, sharing safety-related information with others, end quote. Audi is working with bicycle and equipment manufacturers to offer V2X transponders for cyclists and expects to begin offering V2X in its 2025 model year vehicles. That's a long ways away. I guess it would be mid-2024 when 2025 models come out. So we're looking at about 2 years from now. Quote, we're currently including V2X in the development of our vehicle architecture as we can't wait and we need to be ready, unquote, said Mark Donka, Audi of America's Director of Product Communications. Ford is working on something similar. That's a little bit of a concern that they're working on similar things. Hopefully this is the industry standard. I don't know that much about V2X, but hopefully V2X is like an industry standard and not individual companies, because it would be really nice if they could all communicate with each other. But anyway, time will tell about that. The big takeaway from this, though, is 2025 is a good ways away. We're talking about at least mid-2024 before this technology could be offered in cars. And by then, I would be very surprised if we don't have Teslas capable of operating as robo-taxis. Anyway, continuing on, connected cars will use LTE cellular technology to communicate with each other directly. Eventually, the system will switch to 5G standards, allowing for faster communication. Seems a little odd when you've got something coming out in a couple of years from now that they're not using 5G, but whatever. Pedestrians, bicyclists, highway workers, and emergency vehicles will all be able to be part of the communication network. Best of all, the technology is expected to be inexpensive, costing manufacturers much less than LiDAR sensors, which are rather expensive, and and mobile supercomputers that autonomous cars rely on. This right here is really, really sloppy writing, I have to say. Mobile supercomputers is not correct. Supercomputers are defined to be these large racks and these giant things that do nothing but processing. Yes, the power of full self-driving hardware 3, the power of my Apple iPhone, things like that, those are effectively what supercomputers had 20 or 30 years ago, but they're not considered supercomputers anymore. They're just high-speed edge computing devices. And then we get the takeaway. V2X systems hold great promise, but the focus needs to be on getting drunks, texters, and speeders off the road. Sure, I could agree with that. The ability to detect somebody who is inebriated or drug impaired exists today, but it is not used. Again, not true. My sister-in-law actually worked for a company called Intoxilock that if you had drunk driving, if you were convicted of drunk driving, there was a thing like an interconnect with the ignition thing, and you had to blow into it to prove that you weren't drunk before you were allowed to drive. So it is used today. Yes, it may not be used at a very wide scale, but it's definitely used. Anyway, manufacturers insist it is hard to make it work accurately, and yet they expect us to believe they can make a car that will drive from LA to New York City and park itself without human intervention. Come on, stop taking us for idiots and get it done. I'm not sure what the it is, but I think the it is making sure that drunk drivers and texters and things don't get on. I will tell you that my Tesla now, if I pick up my phone, it knows. It immediately says, pay attention to the road, don't be doing that. So it knows about this kind of stuff. And there's a balance to be made here. And the argument is going to come up that this is public roads and that we all owe it to be safe, and we absolutely do. But at the same time, there's a question of how much our cars need to nanny us, which is an even bigger reason to have things like robo-taxis, because if the car is driving itself, then it's not its responsibility to tell whether we're inebriated or texting or sleepy or any of those things, right? We don't have to worry about the car being a nanny because the car is just driving us. It's like a valet. It's driving us someplace so that we don't have to worry about all of those sorts of things. So again, it's kind of cast as this either or. It's like, wait, we're going to drive from LA to New York City. And by the way, that's going to happen one of these days. There's going to be a fully autonomous drive from coast to coast as sort of a proof of concept that it actually works. And kind of, I think it's like the golden spike that they put in with the superchargers back in 2012 or 2013 when Elon Musk drove across the country. And it was like, so now we can make it all the way on an electric car by going from supercharger to supercharger. There's going to be that moment when that happens with a vehicle where somebody gets into it and starts off in Los Angeles or New York, drives to the other end of the country, and does that all without interacting to some level. I don't know what that'll be. But anyway, it will be a big moment and it will actually happen. But again, the premise of this article is either or, not and. And I would say and. You can do all of these things and work on full self-driving and autonomous technology. I just don't understand the point of the article saying that there's no way that we should continue to work on full self-driving and autonomous vehicles. What we should do is do these other things. It's like, why not do both of them? There's plenty of resources to do both. Anyway, let's finish this up. It's getting me kind of pissed off. All right, same with texting. iPhones now know when we are driving and disable themselves until they can be used safely. Yeah, more or less. Speeding is something that all modern cars can control. Some may whine that they don't want nanny cars, but driving on public roads is a privilege, not a right. That is true. If you want to speed, join a motorsports facility that offers track days. Otherwise, understand that when you use a public street, public safety takes precedence over your dream of being a NASCAR driver. The problem with speeding, at least in the United States, is that it's kind of required almost. There are many, many places where you have to drive faster than the speed limit in order to flow properly with traffic. It's much less safe to drive 15 miles an hour slower than the flow of traffic than it is to drive with the flow of traffic. The problem is that generally speaking, our speed limits are too low and that they're not enforced because they're too low, right? So if you set the speed limit to 55, but really it should be 65 in this area, then the police don't do anything until you're driving 65 or greater. And therefore the entire system of crime and punishment is very, very nebulous when it comes to speeding. So it would help a lot if they actually set speed limits that were correct speed limits that reflected how people are driving already, reasonably speaking, and then enforce them well. And yes, at that point, what you could do is you could implement something like that. I don't think that we're trying to be NASCAR drivers in general. We're just generally trying to get from one place to another relatively efficiently and go with the flow of traffic. Anyway, continuing on. How simple would it be to have a system that immobilizes a car unless a licensed driver is at the wheel? People without a license or a suspended license have no business driving, period. Freedom does not imply the ability to maim or kill other human beings. Do whatever you wish on your own personal private property, but if you expect society to build public roads, public safety is more important than personal liberty. So yes, and I'm going to get back to this in just a minute. I want to finish the article first and then I'll respond to that. Continuing on, there are so many ways driving can be made safer, and it doesn't require massive investments or hugely expensive options to make safe driving a reality. The dream of autonomous cars is an illusion. Why? At least for the foreseeable future. Again, why? It works in limited cases on known routes that don't involve left turns against traffic. Not true. Absolutely, the data does not show that that's true. Let's deal with the possible, not the fanciful. Highway deaths are a clear and present danger, but those who want to fix the problem with autonomous driving systems are looking through the wrong end of the telescope. The solutions are right under our noses. Let's use them to end the carnage on our streets and highways. All right, so the last 3 paragraphs are basically saying, let's do something that we can do, not something that's impossible, to make the streets safer. What is Tesla talking about? And actually, a lot of these autonomous driving companies talking about, they're saying we can make the streets safer by implementing autonomous driving so that we don't have problems of people without licenses driving, children driving potentially, inebriated people driving, sleepy people driving, people who want to text and drive driving, people who want to eat their McDonald's hamburger in one hand and a Coke in the other, and doing that kind of thing where you're driving with like your elbow or something or your knee. That's the kind of stuff that autonomous driving is going to get rid of, and it's going to make the road safer. So all of the argument of this entire thing, including the connected vehicles aspect, is all about making the road safer. But the reality is, and again, Tesla has data to show this, that when you have quality autonomous driving software and hardware operating a vehicle, it is safer than a human being driving. And I know that humans are still in the loop at this point, so we're not talking about robo-taxis and things yet. But even right now, these cars are safer than just people driving on their own. So basically, the entire point of this article is that what we should do is turn cars into nannies to make sure that they're like scolding us constantly and make sure we only do everything that's legally correct and all of that kind of stuff, while there is a technology that's developing right now that's going to make the road safer than a human being could ever be on a road. Again, assuming that this continuing ramp of the way full self-driving is going continues. And so I find it really annoying that luminaries like George Hotz, who's an incredibly smart person and really has the best intentions at heart, I think, but he's just, I believe, kind of experiencing sour grapes because he's been unable to compete with the likes of Tesla and get comma.ai to that level of full self-driving. So he's like, well, nobody can do it. If I can't do it, nobody can. He's kind of neglecting the fact that Tesla has a whole lot more money and they have a lot of people working on this problem, and they're going to keep banging their heads against it because Elon Musk is that kind of a person until they solve this problem. My personal opinion is that they're going to solve this problem very, very soon, within months or at the most a year or two. So by the time this V2X technology to connect the cars is out, then we're already going to have autonomous driving. And again, Teslas are already starting to do things where they're communicating with each other about potholes and other things. That's only going to continue to happen. So I'm all for a connected world. I'm all for cars talking to each other. I think that's a great way to improve traffic flow, to make sure that you don't have secondary accidents after first accidents, to make sure that people don't run into potholes or people working on the road or things like that. So I'm all for that, but this is not an either or. This is a both and situation. We need autonomous driving and we need connected cars. Both of those things work together. Whew, all right. So that was my take on that article. As you can tell, I'm not a big fan of it. I started off by trying to say, look, I'm going to keep an open mind about how all this is. But the more I read, the more I was like, no. There's a sour grapes aspect to this. And there's a, if I can't do it, nobody can sort of aspect to this article. And there's this idea that somehow autonomous driving is not safer than human beings driving, or could never be safer than human beings driving. And again, remember, foreseeable future is a bit of a loose term. I think that that's a little unfair. How about giving us a timeline, saying for the next 5 years or something, or the next 10 years, or the next 40 years? Give us an actual time that we can measure this against so that we can come back in 5 years and look at it and say, were you right or were you wrong? So I will put my, I'll plant my flag in the ground and say by 5 years from now, so what is this, October of 2022. So by October of 2027, robo-taxis will be functional, at least in some cities in the United States and Canada. I don't know about the rest of the world, but anyway, I'll put my flag in the ground. I think it's going to happen substantially before that, but I will certainly put my flag in the ground that by 2027 that'll happen. So I would welcome counter arguments to that about when this will happen if it's not going to happen in the foreseeable future. And in the meantime, let's just see how full self-driving evolves. All right, I hope you enjoyed this episode and found it fun and interesting and thought-provoking and maybe a little bit ire-inspiring. If you did, please do like the video so other people can find it, and of course consider subscribing for more of this kind of content. As always, a huge shout out to my patrons on Patreon. Thank you all so much for your support. I truly appreciate it. I'm going to be down in Florida on Friday for the TeslaCon on the Space Coast, right near NASA. So if you're in the area, definitely come down and say hi to me. And in the meantime, if you want to join our Patreon team, just check out the link in the description. And if you're interested in a whole bunch of really cool merch, check out our merch store. Link is in the description. We have TeslaBot t-shirts, the Tesla meme t-shirt, success is a possible outcome, 4680 battery cells. All of that stuff is on t-shirts, mugs, tumblers, and on and on. So check it out. And for those of you interested in investing, check out WeBull, an amazing platform for buying and selling stocks, and now cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin, Dogecoin, and others. Open an account and get a free stock valued at up to $200, and fund your account and get another free stock valued at up to $1,600. Check out the link in the description and help the channel at the same time. Thank you. And one other thing for my Patreon patrons and anybody else who's in the Florida area, I'm going to be down at TeslaCon Florida on October 21st and 22nd. So definitely come say hi to me if you're in the area. And finally, don't forget we are both Tesla and Amazon affiliates. If you look in the description, you can see how going shopping for a solar roof, a power wall, or anything on Amazon helps out the channel. In the meantime, I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.